Okay, so you sent this Substack post over A Joke's Worth 1,000 Words, I think it's called, by Lee at Portal.
Yeah, that's the one.
And wow, um,
It's quite a ride.
it really is. It's like a perfectly curated intellectual playlist,
Hmm.
right? We've got
Yeah.
Monty Python in here talking about the Roman Empire, and then like out of nowhere, we're getting a deep dive on the British and French mandates in the Middle East, and then bam, it's like super personal with Leet and her childhood and the Beatles, and even her dad gets like a shout out.
It's interesting, right? Because you wouldn't think that those things necessarily go together, but she kind of ties them together with this thread of humor
Yes.
and using humor to talk about these much larger issues of legacy and influence.
Exactly.
And so, you know that Monty Python joke that she starts with, it's not just funny, it's like she's highlighting how easily we forget about the, lasting contributions of the past, both the good and I guess maybe not so good.
Right. And that is where it gets really fascinating to me, is how she connects that Roman Empire bit to what she was talking about with the British mandate in Palestine.
Right.
Like on the surface, those seem like worlds apart, right?
Totally different.
But she's making this point, and it's subtle, but it's so important about how empires, for all their, flaws and problems, often lay the groundwork for things that we just take for granted today.
Exactly. And she uses that example of the British mandate's impact on Palestine, which she says in the post that it really lacked a lot of basic infrastructure before they got there.
Right.
And no, I don't want to, get into like condoning colonialism or anything, but it's definitely a historical reality that she's not afraid to at least unpack a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes her work so compelling, is that she doesn't shy away from these like difficult or potentially controversial topics.
Yeah.
It's like she's saying, hey, history is messy.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
And sometimes the legacies that are left behind are not so clear-cut right.
Yeah.
It's not always black and white.
It's a mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag, exactly.
Yeah.
But then, just when you think you're starting to understand like where she's going with this whole thing, she brings up the Beatles.
Yeah.
And how George Harrison's financial support, like, literally saved Monty Python's life of
Yeah.
Brian.
What's so great about it is she takes these like seemingly disparate things and pulls them all together.
Yeah.
And she's such a good storyteller.
Yes.
That you're going along with her and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I see how this connects to this.
And then it gets like really personal. And I don't know about you, but I got kind of emotional when she starts talking about her dad.
Yeah.
He was this huge Beatles fan, and she talks about how that influenced her entire childhood. And you can just like practically hear the Beatles playing in the background as she's describing, like listening to those records with her dad.
It makes you think about like how all of us are just products of, our past in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like all the stories that we inherit and all of the influences, both big and small, that kind of like make us who we are.
And it really makes you think about those ripple effects.
Yeah,
right?
it does.
Like how something as massive as the Roman Empire, we're still feeling it today, or how, like the Beatles can basically be the soundtrack to your whole life.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
Well, and that's really what I think she's trying to get us to do, is think about those connections, those echoes across time.
Yeah.
And it's not just those big historical forces either. It's like the legacies that we get from our families and our communities, and even just the art that moves us.
Yeah.
And
speaking of art,
mm-hmm.
you had mentioned earlier how she's not afraid to go there, with some of these like controversial topics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she like dives right into the debate about the British and French mandates in the Middle East.
Right. And what I think is so interesting about that is that she doesn't shy away from the criticisms of colonialism.
Right.
Like she acknowledges how those empires were often really exploitative.
Okay.
But then she kind of flips it on its head and says,
What does she do?
okay, so she says we need to look beyond these like easy labels.
Okay.
And really try to understand how complicated the situation was. And she makes this point that those empires, they were definitely looking out for themselves, but they also introduced things like infrastructure and, ways of governing that had a real impact on the region.
It's like that whole thing about the Roman Empire, right?
Right.
Like sometimes the legacy that's left behind is good and bad.
Exactly.
And we have to kind of unpack it all.
Yes. And that's where I think her call to action at the end of the post is so powerful, where she talks about needing like many George Harrisons.
Oh, yeah. That's brilliant.
To support her work.
Such a good analogy. It's like she's drawing this direct line between George Harrison giving money to Monty Python, who at the time were like this risky, satirical comedy troupe, to what she's trying to do now as a writer and a storyteller.
It's like she's saying, hey, I see what you did there, George, and I need some of that. I need people to take a chance on me.
Be a patron of the arts.
Exactly. Be a patron of the arts. She's saying, if you believe in storytelling, if you believe in what I'm doing, then support me.
Yeah.
Like, come on this journey with me.
Be part of this.
Yeah.
And it's like she's saying that we all have a responsibility to shape the future of storytelling and art and even culture. I mean, when you think about it, like, that's like huge. You know what I find interesting, though? It's not just about, like, the money, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like, creators need to pay rent and buy groceries.
Right, of course, but
But she's also talking about something else, something, like, deeper.
yeah, like that need for encouragement.
Yeah.
Like, just to have somebody say, like, hey, I see what you're doing.
Yes. I believe in you.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Like, that's huge.
That is huge. And it kind of reminds me of what you were saying before about, like, recognizing potential.
Mm-hmm.
It's like George Harrison saw something special in Monty Python, and he was willing to, like, put his money where his mouth was right.
Totally. I mean, Leet is clearly a really gifted writer. Like, she can take these, like, really complex ideas, historical events, personal stories, and she just weaves them together in this way that's...
Yet masterful.
It's masterful, and it just draws you in.
And it makes you think.
Yeah.
It makes you want to, like, look at the world differently. And you know what I was thinking about? What if everybody approached their work, their passions, with that same kind of honesty and, like, vulnerability that Leet brings to her writing?
Right.
Imagine if we all did that.
It would be amazing.
It would be amazing. The stories that we could tell, the connections that we could make, it'd be incredible.
Yeah, it's like embracing your own unique voice.
Yes.
Your own perspective. And you know what? We all have something to offer. Like, you never know, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, maybe that crazy little blog post that you're working on.
Exactly.
Or that song you're too afraid to play for anyone.
Yes.
Maybe that's the next life of Brian. Just waiting for a George Harrison to come along.
Exactly. So be a George Harrison. Be a patron of the arts.
Man.
Support the creators in your life. Tell them to keep going, because you never know what amazing things they might create.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably wrap up this deep dive. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I have to say a huge thank you to you for, bringing your expertise to the table, and also to you, the listener.
Yes, thank you.
For sharing this incredible piece with us. I mean, a joke's worth 1,000 words.
I love that title.
It's such a good title.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of what we've been talking about, right? Like, sometimes the most important truths, they're hiding in plain sight, disguised as a joke, or a personal story, or just some random detail that we might otherwise overlook.
It's true. And it's a good reminder to, like, pay attention to those things, to be present, to really listen to the world around us.
So to all our listeners out there, what seemingly insignificant things around us today will be seen as turning points in history years from now. What will your legacy be?
That's something to think about, isn't it?
It really is. And I think that's the perfect place to end this deep dive. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
Absolutely. And remember, history is still being written. And maybe, just maybe, we all have a hand in shaping what comes next.